Everyone, and welcome to the PIBC and PSB joint webinar around the Registered Professional Planner certification. My name is Ryan Noakes. I am the Director of Finance and Member Services with the Planning Institute of BC. And Nzinga Brown, who just popped in from the PSB, will be joining us as well. To give a bit of a perspective and tips and advice from the PSB's perspective. Before we begin into the webinar, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping sort of rules, if you will. We have not activated people's webcams or microphones just to minimize the potential for disruptions. However, everyone in the room today will or should be able to engage by using their keyboard and the chat window down in the bottom right corner. So just click in that little box in the bottom right corner and type your question in. Nzinga and I will present for the first 60 minutes, and then we will do a 30-minute Q&A. If it goes a little bit over, that's fine, but we want to be mindful of people's time. So if we're not able to get through everyone's questions, we will be sure to follow up by email afterwards. In case you have any technical or audio problems during the webinar, unfortunately, we will not be able to assist you with that while we're presenting. Experience from our perspective has shown that a lot of times it has to do with people's hardware, and without direct access to your computer or device, we're not able to help diagnose the problem. But please be aware, we are recording the webinar and we will make it available online for free to everyone who's registered, likely by end of next week. We may post it on our YouTube page, but certainly it will be available for download via a Dropbox link. I did send out a copy of the presentation slides yesterday, as well as a one-page sort of overview sheet of the different certification routes. Feel free to look at those while we present, but I also will send out a copy of those with the recording again by end of next week. Before we really get started, I did want to note a lot of the content in today's webinar is part of a presentation that I've done at the PIBC annual conference over the last few years, as well as presentations to students at each of the 4 planning schools in BC over the last few years. So if you've attended either the conference session or one of the university sessions, there might be a lot of duplicate in terms of the content, stuff that you've heard before, but with the addition of Nzinga, hopefully you will be able to find some new content. So in terms of the RPP process, nationally, about probably going over more than 10 years ago now, it was decided that the entire certification process needed to be updated and overhauled. It hadn't really changed much in the several decades beforehand, other than maybe some band-aid changes here and there. So I believe beginning in the early 2000s is when CIP at the national level and all of the different provincial and territorial institutes and associations got together and decided, let's revamp the process. So one thing that I did want to flag for people, particularly for those who are working with more senior individuals who went through the former process, if you talk to them, oftentimes they might indicate that it's an easy process. You don't need to worry about it. It's a bit of a cakewalk, that kind of thing. Please be aware it has gotten a lot tougher. The old oral exam interview that some of you might be familiar with, decades past, that used to be done over a pint of beer at a local pub. Again, those days are long past. It is a much more rigorous process. So one thing that I would give to people watching now in terms of their advice, particularly candidates, students, pre-candidates and non-members, is try and focus on speaking to people who've gone through the process after 2012, which is when this process took effect nationally. So in terms of the roles in the certification process, PIBC, along with our territorial and provincial counterparts, set and maintain the standards for certification within the profession nationally. We've worked hard to ensure that there's a shared national process in terms of the membership standards and the accreditation of university planning programs. What this does is it allows and facilitates ease of labor mobility between the provinces and territories. So in terms of the regulation of professions, that falls at the provincial level. So each province is able to set their own criteria. But again, what we've done is we've worked hard with our counterparts across the country to have the same shared standards so that if you become a certified member and an RPP here in BC and you move to Ontario or Newfoundland or the Northwest Territories, it's simply a matter of contacting our office, giving us your updated contact info, and then we can ship your file over to the new office. In terms of the Professional Standards Committee, that is a volunteer committee of representatives from each of the provincial and territorial associations. And that body nationally is what sets the policy and the criteria and the competencies and everything that people are expected to do in terms of getting their certification. In terms of what the role of Nzinga and others at the Professional Standards Board is, they operationalize those policies. So to clarify, the Professional Standards Committee sets the policy and the PSB implements it. Ultimately, PIBC and the other provincial and territorial associations are the ones that actually admit people to membership. So sometimes people get a little confused if they submit an application to the PSB and the PSB reviews their application and says, great, you've been recommended for approval for membership. What that simply means is you are not yet a member, but simply that the PSB is notifying us as the provincial institute to let that person in for membership. So when you're going through the application process, which we will discuss in more detail later, please be aware that if the PSB approves you for membership, either candidate or certified, there will be a delay until our board actually meets to ratify that. And that can be in the time frame of a few weeks to a few months, just depending on how things go and when we get notification. Again, I'll get into a little bit more detail about that. In terms of what is a registered professional planner, so they are a certified member and they are a practicing professional planner who've become a candidate member and completed the process in terms of logging relevant work experience, completing a mentorship, completing an ethics and professionalism course, and then completing an ethics and professionalism exam. Like all certified members across the country, including those here in BC, once you get your RPP designation, that doesn't necessarily mean you're done. Sort of being a professional is a bit of a lifelong learning experience. Planning theories and practices change. New tools and resources become available. And so once you become a certified member, all RPPs are expected to do a minimum amount of continuous professional learning each year. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail about that now, but if you want to get some more information about the CPL program and the CPL reporting, you can go to the PIBC website and under membership and then the CPL menu, you can find some more information there. Or you can email me directly after the webinar and I'll provide my contact information later and you can ask me questions there. In terms of the routes to RPP, nationally we worked to aim for just 3 different routes. One for individuals who have an accredited planning degree. And there's a bit of confusion I find sometimes when what people mean by accredited. It's not necessarily that it's accredited by a provincial government as a university degree, but in terms of accredited by the profession as a recognized planning degree. And what that means is the university themselves have to submit an application to become accredited. We work with them to ensure that there is minimum standards and criteria in terms of the course curriculum, as well as the faculty and organizational structure. So just keep in mind that when we say accredited, it's recognized by the planning profession, not necessarily that it's an accredited university degree by a government. The other route, which you'll see called the PLAR route, is kind of what we term the all other category. And it's for individuals who simply don't have an accredited planning degree. It could be people with a degree in geography, political science, even fine arts and dance, pottery making, It is open so that anyone with an academic credentials at a minimum of a undergraduate university degree, so a minimum bachelor degree, are able to get in. It doesn't matter what discipline, but as long as you have at least an undergraduate degree. And then the final third route is reciprocity, where we have agreements with other countries, currently only the American Institute of Certified Planners in the US and the Planning Institute of Australia in Australia, where we have reciprocal recognition of membership. So if you become a certified member here in Canada and you move and take a job in the US, you can, I don't want to necessarily say transfer your membership because that makes it sound simple, but what it means is that you go through an expedited route to become a certified member in the US. So what we'll do is each country nationally recognizes that, okay, you've gone through a rigorous process to become recognized in your own country. So we'll just make you go through a faster route in ours. But that doesn't mean that you can simply just fill out a form, pay a fee, and suddenly you're a member in the US. You likely will need to log certain amounts of experience as well as complete some exams. And Tony, good question in terms of the RTPI, the Royal Town Planning Institute in the UK. There was an agreement with them up until summer 2016 when the RTPI decided to voluntarily back out of that agreement. They chose to back out of that agreement because, similar to us, they at that time decided to go through a complete overhaul of their membership certification process and criteria. And so they decided to temporarily suspend all reciprocity agreements until they've completed that process. And then they would consider re-signing those agreements after the fact. However, currently, my understanding is that RTPI has not restarted those negotiations. And so right now, it's only the US and Australia. Rhiannon, in terms of your question about New Zealand, there was discussions many years ago with the New Zealand Planning Institute around the same time that CIP nationally was negotiating with Australia. However, NZPI backed out of those agreements because I think they were going through some internal organizational and governance issues that were more pressing, and so NZPI backed out of those discussions. As far as I know, there's no discussion about restarting those negotiations. So right now, again, only the US and Australia. If and when new agreements are signed or in discussion, certainly we will notify members nationally. In terms of, oh, and Tony, just to get back to your question, in terms of candidate membership, if you were admitted through the reciprocity agreement with RTPI prior to them backing out of the agreement in 2016, you are grandfathered under that process. I can talk to you about that more offline separately, but just be aware you're not having to start from square one. If you were admitted prior to those agreements being canceled or backed out of, you'll still be grandfathered. In terms of the certification routes, I'm not going to get too much into the details of this slide, but I just wanted to show you, and again, you can follow along that one-page sheet that I sent out earlier. For individuals with an accredited planning degree, in terms of being eligible for candidate membership, the main thing after graduation is to find employment. As soon as you find employment in the planning profession, you are immediately eligible for candidate membership, and you can start working on an application and submitting that. Once you submit it, you obviously need to log a certain number of years of experience, do a mentorship, a course, and an exam, and only once all of those steps are done would you then be admitted to certified membership. The next slide here is for individuals without an accredited planning degree. So the big thing in terms of the difference between individuals without an accredited degree and with, and I'll just flip back here, is regarding the experience. So you'll see on this slide at the top, there's gain 5 years of planning experience. And some people might think that this is unfair in terms of thinking, well, I have a degree in geography. I did a lot of courses in human geography, which were planning related. So, why do I have to do this? It's not meant to be punitive or unfair. In fact, in a sense, it is fair, it's just addressed at a different way. Because an individual without a planning degree, as long as they hold a degree in any discipline, and again, I use that example of fine arts and dance, if you have a degree in fine arts and dance, you're not going to have that academic training in terms of planning theories and practices. And unlike someone who did an accredited degree where we know because it's accredited that they have met certain competencies in terms of the curriculum through their coursework. And so individuals without an accredited degree just need to gain that equivalent knowledge and understanding through 5 years of planning experience. But otherwise, all candidates, once they're in the process, follow the same steps in terms of the 1-year mentorship, the year of experience, the ethics and professionalism course, and the final exam. I'm just going to flip back to this slide where it mentions 2 years of experience. Just a tip and piece of advice for people who have an accredited planning degree. There is, and it depends on if it's signed off, and we'll get into more detail about this later in the presentation, a maximum of 1 of those 2 years of experience can be gained prior to becoming a candidate member. So if you went to an accredited school, you found employment, you decided to think about whether or not you wanted to pursue a designation, and you wanted to work for a year or longer, you can certainly do so. And then if you decide to become a candidate member and apply for it, again, only a maximum of 1 of that 2 years can be gained and approved prior to becoming a candidate member. So similar to the people without an accredited planning degree, you still need to do 1 additional year of experience after you've gone in the door as a candidate member. In terms of individuals with a reciprocity agreement, the main thing for such individuals is that they need to be certified in either the US or Australia. You need to find employment in Canada. And then once you've done that, you again are immediately eligible for candidate membership and you can submit an application. But again, as with the other 2, you still need to do a 1-year mentorship, a 1 year of experience, the course, and the exam. In terms of the practical work experience, I do want to make a big distinction in that it's not simply a matter of clocking X number of years of experience working in the profession. It really does depend on the level of complexity and the level of responsibility in the work that you've performed. So again, you'll see on the screen, you'll need to document it through a logbook, and there are templates on the PSB's website. It must be performed in planning work, and again, must be of sufficient level of responsibility. And it must be reviewed and signed off by a sponsor. In terms of what is, and there's a definition here, record of practical work experience, and there's a definition of what we call responsible professional planning experience. I know it's a PowerPoint faux pas to have so much text on the screen, but I did want to make sure that you guys are aware of the full definition. When you get around to logging your experience, this is the benchmark in which it will be assessed. And we do assess it on a case-by-case basis. We understand that not all planning positions are created equally. A planning technician at the City of Vancouver will be different than a planning technician at the City of Whitehorse or Pouce Capet or Dawson Creek or Nelson or whatnot. So again, we do assess it on a case-by-case basis. But the part that I did want to note and clarify down below is this part here around technical, clerical, or administrative work performed in support of the planning function. So what that often means is, particularly for students and recent graduates in their first jobs that are very junior or technical in nature, not all of the experience that you're gaining will count towards the required years of experience. So let's say you're working as a planning technician at the City of Vancouver, and primarily your role is stamping development applications at the front counter when people drop them off, answering general inquiries from the public about bylaws and zoning. Maybe you're doing some graphic design for signage and pamphlets about an upcoming public consultation process or an upcoming OCP process. Generally, that type of experience will not count. It's not to say it's not valuable at all. Certainly it's valuable in terms of your overall career development, but in terms of the certification process, graphic design work is not core to what a planner needs to know, and so it wouldn't be considered in terms of that high enough threshold in terms of level of responsibility and level of complexity. Another example would be if you're working as a junior planner and all you're doing is collecting data and research and then passing that off onto a planner one or a senior planner, and it's that individual who is analyzing it and putting it into reports and recommendations and standing up and making recommendations in front of boards and committees and councils. Again, if all you're doing is collecting the data and passing it on, again, that likely will not count. But if you're the one analyzing it, if you're putting it into reports and recommendations, if you're managing a team of people, if you are leading and facilitating public consultations, that stuff is more likely to be approved. So Nzinga, I'm going to let you jump in here and just add any additional things that I might have missed regarding the work experience or any tips and advice.
I can definitely provide a few more notes. The first thing I want to make a quick note about is the difference between logging work for your application versus this logbook that you're completing. So there's a few differences I just want to make a quick note of. The first note is that work for PLAR that you're counting towards your 5 years, it can be done in another country, and you can submit that as part of your application. Generally, we look for Canadian work experience as you're putting in your work logs, and it's 2 years cumulative. So if you work in different projects and things like that, you can have the opportunity to submit in sections of month by month. We don't review on a granular basis in terms of hours per se, but it's mostly we look at a month by month basis and whether you're doing substantive planning. So what you're going to want to do is make sure you're evaluating your work against the definition of responsible planning and filling in the template that is on our website. Again, you can change the physical format of the document, but we really need all the information that's in our template to be in the logs. So we need to see the project descriptions, the work, and the relation to the competencies. That's what we really need to see in your work logs. Your job title is not as important to us as the work that you're doing, as Ryan said. So your job title could be something like Chief Happiness Officer, technically. And if your work is substantive planning, we would be able to count that. The final thing I would say about this, and we can go into questions later, is what experience counts for backlogging and for logging your experience. So generally, work has to be completed once you have completed your accredited degree, if you are go through that route, or after you have obtained your undergraduate degree if you went through a PLAR or another route. If you have work experience as a student or as an intern, it's a case-by-case basis. It has to be paid experience, first of all. Secondly, we look at to make sure that it's substantive responsible planning, and you'll have to justify that in your logs. I wouldn't depend on your co-ops and your internships 100%. You might want to give a buffer of a few months from other work experience in order to meet that threshold, because we really look closely at student work to make sure that it was substantive and responsible planning before we approve it. So we might not approve all of it, but put as much work as you can in the logs, and we will take a look at it. And it's more of a case-by-case basis to make sure that you are meeting that 2 year of responsible planning requirements. And we can go into some more of the questions later, but that's all I wanted to mention about the work experience right now.
Okay. One thing that I just wanted to mention before we move on is sometimes we get inquiries from individuals saying, well, I've graduated, I've got my first job, here's my job description, can you look it over and let me know if I would be eligible for candidate membership? And one thing that I do want to point out is that we do not pre-approve memberships or applications without you actually submitting a formal application. I know that some people sometimes don't want to put in work unless they're guaranteed the outcome that they want. but unfortunately that's not going to happen. Pre-approving an application simply just duplicates the work that we're required to do already, and with limited staffing and resources, again, we do not pre-approve applications. We can maybe give general advice in terms of, yeah, it sounds about right, so you don't need to worry, but we're not going to give any guarantees unless you submit a formal application. So just wanted to make that point as well. It's kind of like going to university. Just because you, paid the tuition and signed up for classes, they're not going to guarantee that you're going to get the degree. It still requires you to actually show up to classes and do the work and fulfill all of your assignments. Or to use a planning process analogy, you can fill out all the forms, pay all the fees, do all the public consultations that you need to, and your project still could get denied. So there's no necessarily any guarantees. So I just wanted to clarify on that. In terms of the sponsorship for the practical work experience, when you apply for candidate membership, ideally at the time that you submit your application, you will have identified 2 individuals, and they need to be 2 separate individuals. One who is your mentor, and we'll talk about the mentorship a bit more shortly, and then the other is your sponsor. So as it's noted on the web slide here, the sponsor must be at arm's length from the candidate, and that is to prevent a conflict, a direct or actual conflict, or even a perceived conflict of interest between you and your sponsor. Because essentially what the sponsor is doing is they will review your work experience, your logged work experience, and make an assessment that in their opinion, it meets the definition of responsible professional planning experience. It's not necessarily the role of the sponsor to vouch or verify that you did in fact complete the work, although if they have any concerns, it is their responsibility to follow up with your employer or your supervisor to verify that, but it's not a specific requirement. So for any certified members who might be watching the webinar today, again, you're not being asked to vouch. We're not going to hold you accountable if it ends up that the person lied on their logbook and didn't in fact do the work that they said they did. Again, your role primarily is just to check, does the work meet the threshold for the complexity and the level of responsibility? If you work in a large organization, again, I'm just going to use the example of the City of Vancouver, where individuals in their planning department work in different offices around the city. Or if you work for, let's say, a large private firm, I'm just going to use the example of Urban Systems because I know they have offices scattered all over the country. Your sponsor can still work for the same organization, provided that that sponsor works in a different office or department and does not see you on a day-to-day basis, and that you're not doing the same sort of work or working on the same project. So if you're a planner working for Urban Systems at their office in Vancouver, and you have a sponsor who works out of an Urban Systems office in Ontario, and you have no day-to-day interaction with that person, you have no ongoing sort of personal connection with them, like you don't hang out outside of the office or that sort of thing, that person could still be your sponsor. But ideally, your default should be finding a sponsor who works outside of the organization. In terms of who your mentor can be, and again, we'll get into a little bit more shortly, it's encouraged that your mentor be someone that you work with just to facilitate a face-to-face working relationship so that you can meet in person. It's not a specific requirement, it's just an encouragement. So if you have a mentor, let's say a former professor of yours at Dalhousie who has their RPP designation and is eligible to act as a mentor, but you're, let's say in Kelowna or Victoria, that person could still be your mentor. So just keep that in mind. But again, the mentor and the sponsor have to be 2 separate and different people. I'm going to pass it over to you, Nzinga, to talk a little bit more about the mentorship and the next steps in the process.
Sure.
So feel free to go ahead.
I'm just going to go over the mentorship process first as for the mentor and what that looks like, and then the process itself that the mentor and the candidate should be aware of. So the mentorship component was developed to foster networking and relationship building within the profession, which is very important as a professional and as an RPP. So this process takes place after you become a candidate member. You can't backlog or do any mentorship work before you're approved, but you can certainly start a relationship with a mentor, but you can't officially start logging it until after you are approved as a candidate member. So the candidate, again, you should try to find your candidate, your mentor within 90 days of applying. Uh, we'll give you some leeway, but it's just to make sure that you keep on track. Your mentor needs to be a certified member with 3 or more years of experience as an RPP, and somebody preferably that you can meet with on a regular basis. You can have a retired or inactive member as long as they've been only retired or inactive for 3 years and they were in good standing. They were in good standing when they became retired or inactive. So what does a mentor's role look like? So mentors will meet with the candidates on a bi-monthly basis. So 4 to 6 meetings throughout the 1 year program. It's really up to the candidate to kind of lead this process, but the mentor should be available for the meetings as well as any follow-up. So the mentor, it's around an hour a meeting or something like that, and the candidate should take responsibility to track those meetings, set an agenda, um, make sure that the meetings are logged. There is a mentor log template that needs to be filled out, which involves mentor comments, the topics of the meeting, and things like that. So the mentor should make sure that they are being able to fill out those parts of the log, but the candidate should really take responsibility to make sure that's done. So the commitment's about an hour or so per month or things like that, and then you'll review the logs at the end just for completion and to make sure there's nothing missing. There's a mentorship guide that the mentor and the candidate need to read over, as well as a mentorship agreement, which should be signed during the first meeting. So make sure that you do so, and to make sure that everything is done on time and that all the documentation is sent to the PSB. So that's kind of a little bit about what the mentor needs to be looking out for. And I'll just go into a little bit more about the process. Again, so you'll be meeting on the process for about 1 year, and then there's a mentorship log that needs to be completed. Candidates, please take note that this mentorship process involves, it's not a typical mentorship where you just talk about your work experience, your career development, and things like that. It's more focused. So it's focused on topics that relate to the planning profession, as well as professional responsibility, ethics, and things like that, and the key planning competencies. So you want to make sure you focus on those topics during the meetings, and as well make sure that you are logging that you talked about those topics, as when we review your logs, that's what we're really looking for, to see that you cover those topics. So you want to make sure that you've read through the mentorship guide and know what to discuss and be prepared for each meeting. The next slide, I think, goes a little bit more into what needs to be covered. Again, you want to go over the CIP Code of Conduct, PIBC's ethical codes and standards, public interest, and those kind of things. And once the year is completed, you'll submit a mentor log, which is signed off by the mentor to the PSB for approval. I want to make a quick note that you can do your mentorship and your work logs at the same time, so they can overlap. Everything with the certification process, once you're approved, except for the last examination, can be done at the same time, so you can do them concurrently and work with your mentor and sponsor concurrently. So once your mentorship logs are approved, you'll have completed that section, and it's the same thing for your sponsor and your sponsor logs. You'll submit them for approval, make sure that you've met the requirements and have filled it in completely, and then you'll be approved. So that's kind of some of the main things I wanted to talk about with the mentorship. Mentors, you can keep those hours that you're working with your mentor, and you can use them towards some of the requirements for your CPL. I would just defer to PIBC to talk a little bit more about, or you can talk to them individually about how to log those kind of hours, but it is something you can do, and it also is a way to give back. So I would strongly encourage mentors to take a look at the materials, and I have a screenshot from our website on the next slide. So if you want to find out more about being a mentor or sponsor, go to our website and go to the spot where it says, I'll just get the arrow here. Um, for volunteers, you'll see here, the more information about the mentor role and the sponsor role are here, but to download the actual orientation materials and what it means, you go to the orientation materials part of the website. So take a look at that, see if that works for you before you decide to commit to being a mentor or a sponsor for a candidate. And then you'll know what you're in for, and then you can support the candidate. Something I would note too is that mentors often have a very critical role in preparing candidates for the professional examination. So you want to make sure that you are working with your candidate to understand the concepts and make sure they are prepared. Even if you didn't take the professional examination in its current format, you're there to bounce ideas off of them and to provide guidance and knowledge about the profession. So I encourage you to find out more about the process, and you can always get in touch with us with any questions. So that's basically the mentorship component. I don't think I missed anything, but again, we can go over some questions as well afterwards. Okay, so the next component is the ethics and professionalism course. Did you want to go over that, or should I? Um,
You can go over it in Zynga if you want. You guys kind of handle it more so than I,
right.
so better
Okay,
coming from
perfect.
you.
So the ethics and professionalism course is a course, a national focused course on ethics and professionalism that is mandatory for all candidates, regardless of if you went to an accredited planning program or you went through any of the other routes. This is because in order to ensure that there's a national understanding and to make sure that we're all speaking the same language about ethics and professionalism, there is a fee for the course, and you can register as early as your first day approved as a candidate. It's a self-guided course, and you take it at your own leisure. You do have 6 months to complete it once you register, so make sure you are um, putting your time accordingly and taking the time you need to take the course. You'll be once you register, you'll receive the documentation. Right now, it's an attachment to your email. We are moving towards a digital format, but that might be in the next 1 to 2 years. So once you receive the documentation, you are able to study and review the materials. There's 7 modules, and then you can complete them and read them. There's additional readings that are available, but they're not mandatory. So, some of them require you to go to like a library and things like that and find them, but they're not mandatory in order to pass the test. It's just if you want to explore anything further. Once you're ready, you can email us, and there's instructions that you'll get to receive the test. It's a multiple choice test on in different types of multiple choice questions, and you need a 70% or better to pass. The test is done. You sign an attestation to make sure that you are following the cheating procedures, but you don't have to go to a testing center or anything to write the test. And you're not able to share the questions or your answers with other individuals. It is an ethics test, so we hope that you take that seriously. And we just let you know after you take the test within 1 week whether you passed or failed. You have 3 attempts to take the test, but as long as you read through the materials, you should pass on your first try. Um, it's very rare to have to get to your third attempt. It's usually if you didn't read through the materials, that's when you really would need to go back and do it again. But for the most part, you can pass on your first try. It's just to make sure you read over the materials. It's very, honor system based. So don't worry too much about it. Just make sure you read the materials and take the test at some point. You can go over the materials with your mentor as well. It's very helpful to go over it and to test your understanding. And then you take the test, and that's done. So it's very straightforward. Make sure you leave enough time to do it, and you can start it at any point during your candidate membership. It just has to be completed before you sit the professional examination. In terms of the timelines for some of these things, so ethics tests take about a week to mark. Logs take about 1 to 2 weeks to get back to you, so make sure you leave enough time. And applications take 1 to 2 weeks for for accredited, and then PAR is about 1 to 2 months. So just giving you a bit of timelines about this whole process. Um, so the next part. So again, this is your last. This is the last step is the professional examination. So I want to make a few notes about this. So some again, as Ryan mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, some RPPs took the examination in different formats: oral exam, written exam, etc. In 2016, we decided to move to a multiple choice examination to reduce the subjectivity of the marking, as well as to provide the your results a lot faster. And we found that it's been very successful so far. Um, so this is the last step. You need to complete your logs, your mentor logs, your work logs, and your ethics and professionalism course and test before you're eligible to register. So if you didn't finish that and you didn't get approval in an email from the PSB saying that you finished all of those steps, you're not eligible to register yet. So make sure you get all of that done before you sign up and you register on our website. So most of the time, the registration opens about 2 months before the examination, so you can always register there. So this examination is not a course content based examination. It's more so about ethical issues, professionalism, public interest. It's very case study based, application based. You can study using our study guide and we have sample questions, but so much of this examination is based on experience and understanding of what kind of scenarios you can get into in the workplace. If you've only worked for a short amount of time in a very small area of planning, you might need to do some extra work with your mentor or finding out things from the industry to be prepared for this examination because it covers a wide range of different scenarios that you could get into as a planner. So you want to make sure you take the time to prepare, to study, and to understand the profession. You do have 7 years to complete the entire process. So it's not a rush. It's not a race. Take your time and make sure that you are really ready when you sit the examination. You do have 3 attempts to write it and you need an 80% to pass. It's very rigorous, but it's very important that you take the time to work on it, and it's not an impossible examination. Our pass rates are very high compared to the industry. We're above 80%. To other industries, we're very high. It's above 80% pass rate for pretty much every sitting since we've started the multiple choice format. And the majority of those people pass on their first try. So it's not impossible, but it is rigorous. It's not something that you can just walk into after looking over the materials for 2 weeks. You should take a few months to get ready for this examination. I'm going to go on to the next slide. So what if for any reason you don't pass the examination on your first try? Do give you some feedback. This feedback that you see here is provided to those who don't pass. Um, for those who pass, just in order to, for limited resources, we don't provide you with any feedback. We know that you received 80% or more and that you're ready to move on. So, and you've met their standards. But if you did not pass, here's a matrix that we provide to you and an example of how I scored. You'll see that there's ranges of percentages, and we'll tell you what you did in each section of the examination. Those are the 3 categories that you'll see here. I'll get the arrow. These are the 3 categories of the examination that you'll be examined on, and each question will tell you what category it's in. And then over here is the ranges, and then we'll tell you what you scored in each of those sections. This is like the extent of basically what we can tell you because the questions are always in circulation and being reviewed. So we can't share exactly what questions you got right or wrong, but we do provide, what areas you should focus on and some tips and tricks on what you can do to do better. Again, because this is very experience-based, it's going to be hard for us to tell you exactly how you personally can do better. It's more so getting the experience and going over the topics. Maybe it's an issue of, like you need to read the questions a little bit further or, a little bit more experience in multiple choice examinations. Maybe that might be something to work on. And, if you might want to get like a study group together or work with people to get better at multiple choice exams or things like that. And we are going to be providing more resources as the time goes on for the examination. But not to fear this examination. It is, it's important and you can do well on it. You just need to take the time to prepare for it. And I recommend taking advantage of all the resources that you have available to get ready for the examination. And Ryan, did you want to talk about what happens next after you complete the examination and just confirm the role of PIBC?
Yep. Before I do that, I just wanted to clarify, in terms of the professional examination, the PSB in does facilitate an in-person testing location in Toronto, and the exam takes place only twice per year, once in mid-March and again in mid-September. Those are the only two opportunities in the entire year that you're able to sit the exam. Everyone across the country writes the exam on the same date. But obviously, because of time zone changes, it varies across the country. But here in BC, the exam starts at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. You are given 3 hours and 3 hours only to complete the exam. And it is done using a web-based program. So when you go to do the test, you should show up at least 30 minutes prior. So in this case, 8 a.m., so that you can sign in and register and get set up. You will need to bring yourself a laptop and a power cord. PIBC, myself, we have been facilitating a testing location in downtown Vancouver, about a block away from our office, just across the street actually. So if you are in or will be in the greater Vancouver area and you wish to sit the exam at our testing location, again, just contact Nzinga. She'll get you registered and whatnot. And then what she does is she will send me a list of people who have noted that they will attend the Vancouver testing location. But if you're outside of Toronto or Vancouver and you need to write the exam again, let's say you're in Fort St. John or Nelson, it does mean that you will need to find what's termed an invigilator, or essentially a responsible person who will essentially watch over you and make sure that you don't cheat. Ideally and preferably, it is a certified member with RPP designation for at least 3 years, but that is not a specific requirement, provided the individual is a registered professional. So if you're working in a municipality and your employer says, well, you can sit in this meeting room and do it, get maybe a professional engineer on staff to invigilate the exam for you, or a professional accountant with their CPA designation, or a lawyer, or a doctor. It just simply means that we require that person to have a professional designation of some sort, because that person, it's assumed, will have an understanding of what it means to act in ethical behavior or manner, to be professional and not cheat. And again, that's the role of the invigilator, is to watch and make sure that you're not cheating, that you're not opening other web browsers and Googling answers to questions and that sort of thing. You will need to identify with the PSB who that invigilator is, as the PSB needs to submit information to them in advance. The other thing I wanted to note about the exam is when you are registered for the exam, the PSB will send you an email confirming all of the information, the web link, and how to access the exam through the web-based browser, as well as your login information. And I clarify that because in a recent sitting of the exam, one of the candidates wasn't aware that an email had been sent, and a lot of time was lost for them scrambling to figure out what their login was, and I think that sort of flustered them and they didn't perform too well on the exam. So make sure at least 3 business days out from the date of the exam that you have received that email from the PSB. I believe registering for the exam closes about a week before. So certainly once the date is closed, you should contact the PSB, check your spam filters, your junk mail folders. Sometimes it might end up in there. But if you haven't received anything, be sure to contact Nzinga at the PSB. In terms of the next steps, so just in terms of this slide, just kind of going back, if you want more information about each of the different steps of the certification process, you can find that on the PSB's website. There's an overview. We can talk, or you can find more information about the different entry routes. We do provide a list of all of the accredited planning degree programs. And I did want to add to that as well. In addition to having reciprocity agreements with the US and Australia in terms of membership, we also have reciprocity agreements with them in terms of recognition of accredited planning degrees. So if you received your accredited planning degree from a recognized school in Australia or the US, and let's say you're from BC, you moved to New York, did it at, I don't know, a degree at MIT, as long as it's recognized and you came back to BC, we will still consider that you have that accredited planning degree equivalent to one received in Canada. Unfortunately, what that does mean is if you have a accredited planning degree from any other country outside of Canada, the US, or Australia, yes, it might be recognized by the relevant professional association in that country, but without that reciprocity agreement, unfortunately, it will not be recognized as such, just in terms of the certification process. So let's say you went to school in Iran. We got a lot of people coming in from the Middle East sometimes, so they went to school in Iran. It's a degree recognized as a planning degree by the relevant association in Iran, but unfortunately, because we don't have that reciprocity agreement at the national level, you would still have to go through the PLAR route, or the non-accredited planning degree route, here in Canada. Thankfully, that only applies to a small portion of people, but that is something I want to flag. If you are foreign trained, is outside of the US, Canada, and Australia, you would be considered to have a non-recognized planning degree, and you would have to go through the PLAR route. If you, again, want to get some more information about the process, there's each steps where you can find the application forms, what you have to do in terms of being eligible, more information about the course and the exam, the mentorship, the logging the work experience, and the professional exam. One thing that I often encourage people to do is check out explicitly the mentorship stuff and the logging work experience prior to actually submitting a formal application. Particularly for people who have to go through the PLAR route, part of your application process is to self-assess yourself against a whole whack of different competencies, what we call functional and enabling competencies, which is kind of like the skills and knowledge, the critical thinking, the being compassionate, acting in an ethical manner, how well do you understand planning legislation, tools, resources, that sort of thing. The different competencies are something that you would be discussing with your mentor through that mentorship process, but particularly for PLAR people, you do have to self-assess your knowledge and understanding of those different competencies when you submit your application. And there's no expectation that you need to be an expert in everything. I think you give yourself a rank out of 1 to being poor and 5 being excellent, and I know everything there is to know about this competency. Again, there's no expectation that you be a 5 on every single thing. Be honest with yourself. Really what it does is it helps the PSB understand where you might have deficiencies when they're reviewing your 5 or 6 years of experience when you submit that. So again, do an honest self-assessment. If you've hit 5 on every single one of those competencies, the PSB might come back to you for clarification, or for you to some way prove or justify that you have an expert level understanding on every single one of those competencies. We kind of treat it as not everyone is able to be an expert at everything all at the same time. So again, if you hit 5 on every single thing, we'll probably come back to you for clarification. But again, just be honest with yourself in terms of that self-assessment. And if you're ready to just apply right away, you can find all of the application forms under the Apply Now. So this certification menu is if you want to do a bit of a deep dive in terms of all the different processes. But if you're ready to go, you've looked at everything, just click on the Apply Now button, and that will take you directly to the application forms and the documents that you need to submit. If you want more information, certainly we'll address people's questions in the next few minutes. But if we haven't addressed anything, or again, you want some more information, you can find that on the FAQ page on the PSB's website, or you can contact us if you have a more direct question that's not answered in the FAQs, and I'll provide our contact information at the end of the webinar. As Nzinga noted, once you've done the exam, you still need to have your certified membership and RPP designation ratified by the Board of Directors of PIBC. The Board of Directors are sort of the gatekeepers, if you will, for all new memberships. And so depending on the timing of when you complete the exam, when you get your results back, you may have to wait again a few weeks, maybe even a few months. You'll note here that we have a scheduled meeting date for March 15th. Well, I believe there's a scheduled sitting of the final PSB exam on March 19th, if I'm correct, or right around that date. So let's say you sit the March sitting and you pass, well, you're probably going to have to wait a couple of months until May when our board meets again to actually formally ratify you. For people who write the exam at the September sitting in mid-September, it might be a really tight timeline between when you complete it to when you get the results back to when we can get your name on the agenda for our board to ratify you. These are the meeting dates of when the board actually meets, but we have to send out the agenda packages 7 to 10 calendar days before then. So again, if you do the mid-September sitting, you might end up having to meet until November 9th, or wait until November 9th when the board meets to actually ratify it. In the 12 plus years that I've been with the Institute, the PIBC board has never not ratified someone for their RPP designation once it gets to that point. So you don't really need to worry, but it is a bit of a stopgap measure in the sense that maybe there's someone on the board who's aware of you engaging in some very serious ethical or unethical behavior or acting in a very unprofessional manner. And that's a stopgap measure for our board to say, hold up, we might want to wait on approving this person. But again, in the hundreds of RPPs that have gone through the process while I've been with the Institute, not once has the board ever done that. So you don't really need to worry. So it's kind of a rubber stamp approval, if you will. But again, you will have to wait until our board ratifies you before you can officially and formally use the RPP designation. Once the board has ratified you, we will send you a notice saying congratulations. And for new certified members in PIBC, and a lot of people watching this right now might be familiar, we do an annual World Town Planning Day Gala in the first half of November, and we do a bit of a convocation ceremony. So we invite you to come to this dinner for free, receive your membership certificate. You get to walk up on stage. You don't need to give a speech or, an Oscar congratulations or anything like that, but it's a free dinner on our dime, and it's a really good opportunity to network and meet with other new certified members and RPPs. But again, you will have to wait until our board meets before you can use the designation. In terms of opportunities and challenges, as we noted earlier, logging the work experience and doing the mentorship and even doing the ethics and professionalism course can be done concurrently. So you don't need to wait linearly, if you will, for each step to be completed. You can do them at the same time. As Nzinga noted, you have 7 years to complete the process. So you have 7 years from the date that you were admitted as a candidate member to complete the process. By no means does that mean it will take you 7 years. My experience, and Nzinga can probably back me up on this, the overwhelming majority of people, whether they have an accredited planning degree or have to go through the PLAR process, the overwhelming majority of people will be able to complete the process within 2 years, give or take 6 months. I've seen people get through the process as quick as between 1 and 1.5 years with an accredited degree, usually within 18 to 24 months with sort of a PLAR or non-planning degree. But we give you 7 years because we understand that life might throw you some challenges. Maybe you're seconded by your employer into a non-planning position, and so you're not able to accumulate the years of experience or work on a project. You go on maternity leave or sick leave, or you decide to take a sabbatical and go traveling the world for a year. It's perfectly fine. You do have 7 calendar years. Only in extraordinary, extenuating circumstances would we allow someone to extend beyond those 7 years. So it really is dependent on you as the candidate to make sure that you're getting the process moving forward in a timely manner. We're not necessarily going to handhold you and remind you, hey, have you been working on your logbooks? Hey, have you been meeting with your mentor? We will warn you when you get down to that last year of eligibility and saying, hey, you only have 1 year left of candidate membership and you haven't really done anything, contact us and let us know. But if after 7 years you come back and say, well, I've just been really busy, well, unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily make you a special case. Everyone's busy. It really only is based on extraordinary extenuating circumstances. So I don't know, let's say your spouse is diagnosed with a terminal illness and you become their primary caregiver and your whole life becomes caring for them and you haven't been able to work on the process. Okay, maybe we can grant an extension. Or you were running a business with a partner and your business partner committed identity theft and stole all of your information and racked up massive bills, and now you're dealing with court cases and lawyers and legal issues, and you haven't been able to work on it over the last 7 years. Okay, maybe. But to simply come back to us and say, well, I've just been busy. Well, everyone's busy. That doesn't necessarily make you a special case. The other thing I'd like to flag is if your employer is imposing specific deadlines on you to complete the process for you to get a promotion or a pay raise or anything like that, please let myself or Nzinga know as soon as possible. Don't wait until the 11th hour to go, oh my God, I only have 3 months left, but my employer needs me to get this done. Can I just rush through it all? Again, unfortunately, no. So if you have any opportunity or challenges or concerns about your ability to complete the process, let us know as soon as possible. Our ability to provide assistance and help you find an outcome that works in your favor is a lot greater the earlier you contact us. So again, if you're waiting until the 11th hour at the last minute and we're threatening to kick you out because the 7 years is almost up and then you suddenly are wanting help, it really restricts our ability because, well, we might have to confer with other people and those other people might not be meeting for some time, and by then you might already be kicked out. So again, just reiterating, if you have any concerns, let us know as soon as possible. The earlier, the better. In terms of finding a mentor and/or a sponsor, one thing that I found in my presentations to the 4 planning schools here in BC, and that would be the School of Community and Regional Planning at UBC, University of BC, the School of Environmental Planning at the University of Northern BC in Prince George, the School of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University. And I want to clarify that only individuals within the planning stream in the REM program at SFU have an accredited planning degree. So if you are doing the REM degree at SFU, but you are outside of the planning stream, you will not have an accredited degree when you convocate. So you must be in the planning stream in REM in order to be deemed to have that accredited degree. And then we also have the Master of Community Planning at Vancouver Island University in Nanaimo. So what I found is a lot of those programs are now building in a mentorship component as part of their degree program. And it's not necessarily sort of what I'm going to term the formal certification mentorship in terms of that role. It's more general career advice and guidance that mentor will provide. A lot of the schools are also getting students now to work on group projects where they're paired with maybe a professional planner in a real world experience working on a real world project. In terms of that mentor or those individuals, what I would strongly encourage students to do is to maintain that mentorship relationship even once you're outside of school. Because as long as that person is a certified member with their RPP designation in good standing for the last 3 years, they could act as your mentor in the formal process here with the PSB. So it might just mean maintaining open lines of communication with that individual between when you graduate and when you find your first employment. But it makes it a little bit easier if it's someone you know. And we have shifted the onus more on the candidates to identify who their mentor and sponsor will be. It's not meant to be onerous or punitive, but what it is meant to do is to help recent graduates and candidates understand that to be a successful professional, a lot of it comes down to building professional relationships and networks, and somewhat, if you will, forcing you to find who your mentor or sponsor is starts making you get into that habit. If you're in a very rural, remote northern location and you've tried your best to find a mentor but you're struggling, then you can contact our office or the PSBs to provide assistance, but we will not do a direct matchmaking service. We will not hand you who your mentor or sponsor will be. The onus is still on you as the candidate to get that process done. Again, if you're in an extraordinary extenuating circumstance, then we can provide assistance. In terms of the practical work experience, and someone might have asked this question already, co-op or internship experience, if it is part of your required degree program requirements, will not count towards that X number of years of experience that you'll need. And again, it's not meant to be unfair, but it's just to understand that co-op and internships often are unpaid. And again, to count that work has to be paid, but also it's just too junior level because essentially it's probably just too technical or administrative or clerical. On the flip side, if you are completing an accredited degree or any degree in a university program part-time, but you're still working professionally, separate and outside of your degree program on planning projects, that experience can count. So again, provided that it's not experience gained as part of your degree requirements, you can generally submit it. Again, there's no guarantee it will be approved, but it's eligible to be submitted for the PSB to assess. Getting the most out of the course and the exam. I believe Nzinga might have noted, you're encouraged to do study groups, talk to people who've gone through the process before. When you get down to doing the test for the course, again, it is on the honor system and you're acknowledging that you're not sitting in a room with 5 other people writing the test at the exact same time, sharing questions and answers. It is based on the honor system, and we will address any issues or concerns around someone cheating on the test or the exam. Kind of goes back to acting in an ethical manner. If you're already cheating in the process just to get your RPP designation, that's probably something you need to address at a personal level. But we do investigate issues of cheating in the process, and it can result in you being struck from membership and potentially including being banned from restarting the process for a number of years or even financial penalties. So we do take it seriously and we hope that you do as well. And as Nzinga noted, in terms of preparing and writing for the final exam, don't think that it's a cakewalk that you can just, cram the night before, quickly skim over the materials and coast through it when you sit on it in either March or September. It is rigorous, it is serious. Some of the questions will be tough. It is sort of synthesized in terms of looking at the studying materials, thinking about your own individual work experiences, any ethical dilemmas that you've had to deal with, how do you balance public and private interests in your own work, and that sort of thing. It's not something that you can just, it's not like a definition where you can just read it, memorize it, and regurgitate it out during the exam. It does need to be analyzed and sort of, you need to use your critical thinking, if you will, in terms of completing the questions. In terms of wrapping it up, I will get to the questions that everyone has noted during the presentation, but here is our contact info. If you have questions about submitting your application, logging work experience, the mentorship, sponsorship, that sort of stuff, feel free to contact Shayna Asgill at the PSB. She's not with us today, but she's going to be your primary point of contact. And Nzinga would be able to answer questions directly related to the exam. And Nzinga, please confirm for me, is it you that people deal directly with if they want to register for it, and you're the one that's going to be sending out confirmations and the materials?
My primary focus for the examination is the content of the exam, the delivery of the examination. You are still able to register online, and there's not really much that needs to be contacted with us directly. But if you have any questions about the actual materials, the email will come from the certification email address that the materials that you'll receive. We usually send them like on a weekly basis. So if you register for the examination, you won't necessarily receive all the package the same day. We send them like on a weekly basis and send it to everybody. So just kind of take a note of that. But yeah, most of the emails will be coming from the certification email address regarding the registration and logistics. But if you have any questions about, the content, the process, those kind of things, I'd be happy to answer those kind of questions.
Okay. So I have been taking note of people's questions over the years. One of the earlier questions, and some of this we might have already addressed, but I'm still just going to make sure that we address it, is how does sponsorship play for this route? How many years? I think what that means is it's not like the mentorship where you need to fulfill a 1-year requirement for the sponsorship. And it kind of comes down to the candidate and how quickly they can both gain the work experience that they need, but also logging it. So your role as the sponsor could be to sit back and wait until the candidate submits their completed logbook to you, and then you can assess it and maybe or review it, and maybe that happens over the course of a few days or a few weeks. If the candidate member is submitting to you as a sponsor chunks of experience, maybe every few months, for you to look at and have a discussion with them about, again, that might be the case. So it really does vary. It kind of varies on a case-by-case basis. But it kind of comes down to what the candidate wants to do. And maybe that's something that the candidate and the sponsor can have a discussion about, is how often should the candidate be submitting to the sponsor maybe a draft logbook or whatnot, whether it's once a year, once every 6 months, whatnot. We kind of leave that up to you guys, but certainly the expectation is that the sponsor will review it, all of it, at some point. And Nzinga, clarify me for this in case I get it wrong. We don't require or expect that people submit their experience to the PSB for review in chunks. Preferably, you gain it all, you work, you gain it all, you put it all together, all 2 years or 5 or 6 years or whatever, and you submit it as one big
Yeah,
chunk.
that's
So,
correct.
Nzinga, is that correct?
The better way for us to review it, so you can review it on a more comprehensive level. So, and it's just also better, if you have a sponsor that doesn't have as much time to review it, it's better if they just review it all at once. But it is preferable if you need to submit 1 year, in a 1 year chunk to us, you can, but your sponsor will have to sign off on any type of submission. So you can't submit the log, just the work, and not have your sponsor sign off on it. We need a signed sponsor validation form for every submission that we get. And the sponsor will also need to sign the sponsorship agreement at the beginning of the year. So you should make sure they sign that at the beginning of your candidate membership and send that to us, just like you do for the mentor. It needs to be signed so we know that you have a sponsor that's reviewing your materials. And every document that we receive for logs has to have a sign-off sheet from the mentor using that sheet that is on our website.
Okay. In terms of some tips and advice for candidates and particularly students and recent graduates, one thing that I strongly encourage you to do is log your experience as you gain it. Don't wait until the end of the 2 years or the 5 years or whatnot to start developing that portfolio and filling out all the required documentation. Do that as you gain it, particularly if you think you're going to change employers, or you need to, log 5 years experience. It'll be much easier to develop that portfolio and fill out the required documentation when that experience is still fresh in your mind, rather than trying to remember, well, what projects did I work on 5 years ago? Because that's where you might make mistakes. Someone asked about in the PLAR route if the experience and the mentorship can be done concurrently. And yes, again, the mentorship, logging your experience, and even completing the course can be done at the same time. The entire process is certainly designed to take at least 1 year because you have that 1 year of mentorship. But again, if you work on everything concurrently, and you stay on top of it all, you could complete everything within as short as 18 to 24 months. In terms of the 2 years of total work experience, for those who have an accredited degree, again, a maximum of 1 year of that experience can be gained prior to you submitting and becoming a candidate member. Again, that just means that at least one of those 2 years must be gained after you become a candidate member. So I just wanted to clarify on that. Nzinga, you might need to answer this one. Can you log planning experience from another country before a planning degree? So, can you log and submit foreign work experience?
So for the PLAR application, if you're referring to application, definitely any experience that you've gained anywhere in the world prior to applying, you can use that in your portfolio and your application. I would also note that if you have any specific questions about the portfolio, there is a portfolio development guide on our website, and you can also get in touch with us with more specific questions. But generally, yes, you can use international experience. Regarding your work logs during a candidate membership, We don't have a very explicit rule about the Canadian experience, but most of the PTIAs through discussions are saying that you should be gaining experience in Canada because you are obtaining a Canadian planning designation. So, I mean, if you do have to leave the country for a short time, we understand that, and you can potentially work towards that. But generally, we're looking for Canadian experience when you're doing your 2 years or 1 year of work logs if you went through one of the other routes. So you want to make sure that you're following that. But yeah, for the application, it can be any experience from anywhere in the world as long as you can have the documentation and information to justify that work that you did.
Okay, and Aaron, I'm going to address your question at the bottom of the chat window right now in terms of logging experience after becoming a candidate member, even if you didn't have a sponsor during that time. And I think really the only situation that that would happen in is that 90-day window where you still have an opportunity to identify with the PSB who your sponsor is, even if you didn't identify who that person was when you submitted your application. And Zinga, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, you can still submit that experience. It's not a case of you can go through your entire candidate membership eligibility without identifying who your sponsor is, because again, you must do that either at the time of application or within 90 days of being approved. So within that 90 days of experience, yes, even if you have not identified who your sponsor is during that time, or even the 1 year of experience that you gained prior to becoming a candidate, if you have an accredited degree, yes, you can still submit that experience. It's not a specific requirement that you can only submit experience gained after you've identified who your sponsor is.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And your sponsor will have to validate any backlog experience anyway. So the date you obtain your sponsor is not of immediate consequence, but we do ask you to have a sponsor and not just pick one that when you want to submit your logs. But anytime, like for that 1 year of candidate membership logging, it starts the date that you become a candidate member, not the date that you obtained your sponsor. But still keep on top of it and get a sponsor. And just to address that question, the portfolio development guide is for the portfolio for application. So when we refer to work log, so work log is only for candidates, portfolio is only for applicants. So we want to make that distinction because there are different requirements. It's both related to working and planning, but there are different requirements and there's different templates and things like that. So your portfolio development guide is on the entry routes page of our website, and it gives you a number of pages on what you need to include and some tips about how to get it approved. So make sure you review that, and then once you review that, ask us any additional questions about that.
Someone asked an earlier question in terms of, is there an intention by the organization to define a more robust core of practice and discipline in planning? I did want to clarify that that is something that was addressed in the last, I think, year or two nationally, where in terms of approving a scope of practice document, which kind of defines what we would consider professional planning experience. I don't believe we have that scope of practice document posted publicly on the PIBC website. And Nzinga, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's on the PSB's website either, not currently anyways. But if you want to get a copy of that document, actually what I'm going to do is make a note to myself to send everyone who's registered for today's webinar a copy of what that document is, just so you have it. It's not a confidential private document. It was developed internally to help us in terms of staff and the assessors in terms of reviewing applications. But I'm going to, again, provide a copy of that. Unless Nzinga, you have any major concerns with me providing a copy
no, yeah,
of that.
you can share some of the information on that for sure.
Okay. Question about everything being done concurrently, which I think we've addressed. Someone had a question in terms of the level of complexity for the PLAR route. Can you gain as a technician as opposed to a planner or planner one? Again, just to reiterate, we don't worry too much about job titles. We do look at the actual work that you performed. A planning technician in the city of Vancouver will probably, I'm just theorizing here, a planning technician at the city of Vancouver might be doing more, let's say, low level technical or administrative stuff, as opposed to a planning technician in, let's say, Terrace, where they might be only one of two people in the planning department. And so your ability to be exposed to more higher level stuff is much greater. Again, it's just an example. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case. So yes, essentially what we would recommend is, when in doubt, put the experience in the logbook anyways. It might mean, yes, you went through all that effort of documenting it and putting it and submitting it in your logbook, and then ultimately it not being approved, but at least you know it's not approved and you don't need to think, oh, well, what if? Because if you don't submit it and you submit other stuff, and let's say most, like some but not all of that stuff that you did submit was approved, that means you're going to have to submit another follow-up portfolio or logbook submission, and that just sort of delays the process for you by at least a few months. So my recommendation is always, when in doubt, if you're not sure, put it in anyways, and put in more than the minimum required amount. So if you have an accredited degree and you need to log and have approved 2 years of experience, submit 3 or 4 years of experience if you can. For a PLAR candidate, if you need 5 or 6 years of experience, submit 7 or 8. Because again, if there's a portion of experience that doesn't get approved, there's additional stuff that can be assessed right then and there at the same time, and it'll help keep the process moving for you. Someone asked a question in terms of what is the difference between a provisional member and a candidate member. Provisional was the old nomenclature that we used for what are now candidate members. So internally, with us here at PIBC and the PSB, when we talk about provisional members, we talk about candidate members who are subject and grandfathered under the former certification process and who are still going through that route. However, anyone admitted, certainly with PIBC, anyone admitted after September 2012 will be going through this process. So again, provisional member is just to denote someone who's going through the old process. Candidate member is to denote someone going through the current process. Some people had some specific question in terms of development permit applications, variance reviews, staff reporting, whether or not that type of experience would count. I'm going to suggest that maybe you contact the PSB directly offline outside of this webinar, because I don't want to, we're not going to sort of approve and say, yes, that would actually be a count, unless you actually submit a formal application for review. What I would recommend is, when you're thinking about your experience, and I'm going to flip all the way back to this slide in terms of, think about it this way. Does the work that you're doing comprise analysis, projection, etc.? Does it show a specific relationship to public policies or programs, a substantive amount of initiative and judgment? If all you're doing, let's say, is, well, I took minutes at a planning committee meeting, well, that's probably not going to count. Or it has stuff to do with HR issues, human resources issues in a planning function. Again, that stuff won't count. But if you have specific questions about the work that you're doing, again, feel free to contact the PSB, because ultimately they're the one that, their office is going to be the one to make that assessment. But the PSB might come back and say, well, we're not going to let you know unless you actually submit a formal application. So I just wanted to clarify on that. Someone asked about work experience outside of Canada. Again, you can submit that experience. I just want to flag, though, if 100% of your experience is gained outside of Canada, what that likely will mean is that you might not meet all of the competencies towards getting your RPP designation, because there is an expectation of candidates to have a minimum understanding of the legal and legislative framework that planners work within here in Canada. Planning theories and practices are generally going to be the same across countries, but it's the law. That will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, country to country, province to province, city to city. And so there is an expectation that as an association, we have a responsibility to ensure that anyone who gets an RPP designation has a sufficient minimum understanding of the legal framework here in Canada and BC. And so if you submit all of your experience from outside of Canada, it might mean the PSB will come back and say, well, you're deficient on these sort of legal legislative framework competencies, and so you need to gain more experience, do courses, that sort of thing. So that's really the main thing that I want to flag for you is it's not so much the planning theories and practices. If you've gained, if you have foreign experience, it's more the legal and legislative framework. Someone asked about co-ops and internships. Again, that won't count if it's part of your degree program, but if you're working part-time while going to school, as long as the experience you've gained is outside of that degree program, you can submit it. Someone asked, and maybe in Zynga, this is sort of just a further clarification. Someone asked, do you consider graduate research assistants as appropriate experience? So, you know, I'm working as a TA, I'm in a graduate program, and I get paid research job as part of their, let's say, Master of Science program. Would that type of experience count, the sort of graduate
Yeah,
research
so
assistant?
research in a general sense, we can consider that as part of responsible planning. But again, like it has, in terms of that definition there, it has to have a specific relationship to public policies or programs, so influencing the development of communities. So if your research is strictly, for the purposes of academia and not for use in actually influencing communities, then it might not, it likely won't count. But for example, if you're working on a research project that will be presented and used by like a municipality or things like that, then you can definitely put it in and we'll consider it. But again, it can't just be research for the purpose of increasing the knowledge of the academic institution. It has to be more related to, are you working on a real world project that is going to help influence a community and in planning development in your community. So that's what we really look for in terms of research work that you're doing, and especially it has to be paid. So and it has to be the work you're being paid for has to be the research and the responsible planning work that you're doing.
Okay. Just noting the time because we're just coming up at 1:30 and we still have a lot of questions. So I'm certainly willing to stay on for another 15 minutes until about 1:45 to try and get through some of the more questions. And Zinga, do you have
Yeah,
additional
yeah, I can
time?
stay
Is
for
that okay
15
with you?
minutes. Yeah.
Okay. And just to clarify, in case we're not able to get through all of the remaining questions within the next 15 minutes, what I'll do offline is address them within Zynga, and then when we send out a copy of the access to the recording and the scope of practice document and whatever, for the questions that we're not able to address right now, we'll clarify what those were in the email that I'll send out as long with our response. Because I want to try and address everyone's questions, but if we're not able to address it or we didn't address it clearly, feel free to contact myself or Nzinga after the fact. So someone asked, if their master's degree is in business, but they're working in planning and have planning experience, are they able to potentially become certified? Again, yes. In terms of the academic credentials, the expectation is that you have a minimum undergraduate degree, but it can be in any discipline. Planning, geography, political science, psychology, ceramics, dance, music, it doesn't matter. As long as you have at least an undergraduate degree and you are employed in planning, then you
Can I
are
just make a quick
eligible.
note about that as well?
And
Some people ask again about academic requirements. To have just a college certificate, that doesn't count as a degree. So you want to make sure that you meet that minimum requirement. And there may be some master's programs that don't require you to have an undergraduate. There's very few, and sometimes they're business degrees and they're kind of masters, but they're not really. We need to see a transcript that has like an undergraduate degree on it. So, you have to complete that kind of requirement if you're going through the PLAR route. You need to have an undergraduate degree, and it needs to be a full degree to be considered. And it can be, again, in any field, and it can be obtained in any country as long as if you got your degree in a country that is not reciprocal with us, you need to complete an assessment of that degree to make sure it's the equivalent of a Canadian undergraduate degree.
okay. A couple of people asked in terms of incentives in CPL units for RPP's mentoring. I do want to note that PIBC I'm just in the midst of working with our committee in terms of updating our CPL policy document so that certified RPPs who mentor candidate members as part of the formal mentorship process in the certification process, we are looking at making that time that you put in as a mentor count as organized, structured CPL units. Because the reporting of CPL units is divided into two categories, one being organized structured, which is things like attending conferences, events, lectures, workshops, that sort of thing. And then self-directed or independent CPL activities, which could be self-guided walking tours, reading academic journals and magazines, as well as volunteer work, whether it be for the profession or in a civic body or agency. But to incentivize more certified members to become mentors, we are changing it so that, or looking at changing it, I should say, so that you can claim it as organized, structured CPL units rather than independent and self-directed, because we do know that sometimes certified members struggle meeting all of the required organized units. So we are looking at updating and changing that policy. It'll differentiate between someone who does what I'm going to call informal mentoring, which is outside of the RPP certification process, and you're kind of meeting with someone and just talking about, general career development and job search advice and that sort of stuff. That would still be independent and self-directed. It's only mentorship as part of the certification process that would be considered as organized. Again, we're looking at changing that policy. It hasn't been approved, but certainly in the first half of 2019, we're hoping to have that implemented, and we will send out notices to our membership if and when that is approved. Someone was asking a question about the 7-year timeline to complete the process. That timeline, again, only applies from the date that you're admitted as a candidate member. And again, that's just to acknowledge that sometimes life throws you curveballs and it might take you a while to complete the process. That 7-year limit has no bearing or effect on individuals who are pre-candidates. So I know that we might have, about 10 to 15 pre-candidates who signed up. So when we were changing the certification process, close to a decade ago now, there was somewhat of a concern, if you will, that for people with the PLAR route who don't yet have that 5 years of experience, that they would sort of be outside the tent of the profession and they wouldn't be able to access, member rates at conferences and events and other information. So PIBC and our counterparts across the country created what we call that pre-candidate category. So pre-candidate membership is for individuals primarily who have a non-planning degree, who are working in planning, but who do not meet yet the 5-year experience requirement to be eligible to submit an application for candidate membership. So that 7-year time limit does not apply to pre-candidates. It only applies to candidates. In theory, you could remain a pre-candidate indefinitely, but the expectation is that once you have the required years of experience, you will immediately apply as a candidate member. If we notice that you've been a candidate member for 10 years, we might follow up and say, hey, might need to nudge you to apply for candidate membership. But we also acknowledge that, and particularly for people in small municipalities, you might be acting 50% of the time as a planner and 50% of the time as a bylaw enforcement officer. Well, unfortunately, that bylaw enforcement officer work will not count, so you might end up having to work 10 years just to get that 5 years of experience. But again, that 7-year time limit does not apply to pre-candidates. You can be a pre-candidate for an indefinite period of time, although again, after 10 years, we'll probably want to follow up with you.
Can I make a quick note as well? Just to clarify the role between the PIBC and PSB, once you become a candidate member, you go to the PSB and you submit the application and you submit that to us. We refer you to PIBC, who reviews it and makes the decision. So if you want to get started, if you can be a pre-candidate member, start with a PIBC. To move from pre-candidate to candidate, you have to come to the PSB and apply through us and complete our process. Once you're approved by PIBC, your role with PIBC is to make sure you're maintaining your candidate membership and you're following all those responsibilities, but anything related to the certification, so your logs, your ethics tests, anything like that, come to the PSB directly. If you get those confused, it's okay, but we'll likely just refer you back to the appropriate party to deal with that particular issue. But certification is PSB, and applying for candidate membership, anything else is related to your membership itself is PIBC.
Yep. And that actually brings up a good point for me as well. The PSB only deals with candidate and certified memberships. If you are any other type of member, you will deal directly with the PIBC. In terms of submitting your application for candidate membership, there are fees that you need to pay directly to the PSB, application fees. But you do need to pay annual membership fees separately to PIBC. So typically what would happen is you fill out the forms, you get all the required documentation, you submit your application fee to the PSB. PSB reviews it, they say, great, everything's good. We recommend the PIBC approve you for membership. What we would then do, the PIBC office, is follow up with you and then have you pay annual membership fees. And I can let you know now that for 2019, for the entire calendar year, candidate membership fees as well as certified membership fees will be $559. That's all taxes, all in. It's PIBC annual membership fees, CIP annual membership fees. There is insurance coverage, professional errors and omissions liability insurance coverage as part of your candidate membership fees plus the applicable government taxes. But all in, that's $559. Depending on the time of year that you're admitted as a candidate member, we may prorate those fees. But I just want to clarify, you pay fees to the PSB, they approve you or recommend you for approval. You pay to PIBC your membership fees. You may have to pay to the PSB course and exam fees, but again, those are direct to the PSB and have no bearing on payment of membership fees to PIBC. So I do want to make that clarification. For students and recent graduates, in terms of looking for work, a piece of advice that I often give is if you're successful in getting to the interview stage for a planning job, and during the interview, the interviewer asks you, do you have any questions for us or the organization? I strongly recommend that one of the questions that you ask is, what support does that employer or organization provide to its planners in terms of getting their professional designation? Because there are some municipalities and some consulting firms that will cover the cost of the application fees and the course fees and the annual membership fees, but there are some that won't. And so it's good to understand and know ahead of time before you get involved in this process what the financial implication for might be for you personally, because you might have to hold off on submitting an application so that you can save up for those fees. So the fees that the PSB charges is posted on their website. The annual membership fees that we post are on our website. Take a look at that before you start the application process. Someone asked about how many people passed the exam on their first attempt since it switched to the multiple choice. I think in Zynga you said about 80% or greater for each sitting since we switched to the multiple choice passed the exam. Wouldn't be much of a test if 100% of people passed 100% of the time. Unfortunately, that means there might be a few that don't pass, but that is a much better pass rate than it was when it was more open-ended questions. I think we had some sittings where the pass rate was as low as 60%, but on average, it's about 80% now. In terms of meeting with a candidate and their sponsor, in terms of looking at the work experience, again, I think we kind of addressed that already. You kind of leave it, we leave it between the sponsor and the candidate to identify how many times they would like to meet. But as Nzinga said, ideally, you're only submitting your full complete logbook with the full years of experience once to the PSB, but you can meet as many times or as few times as you want with your sponsor. Do we provide any general examples of the exam questions? And unfortunately, no. There is a national bank of hundreds of questions that we cycle through in each sitting. No two sittings of the exam will have the exact same questions. We do not provide copies of previous exams because, hey, that question might be reused in a future exam years down the road. We do update and change the questions on a sort of a regular basis, if you will. But no, we do not provide copies of the exam questions. And as Nzinga noted, if you fail on the exam, we do not say, well, you failed on question 5, and this was what question 5 was. All we do is we say you failed on the ethical portion of the exam, or you failed on the public interest portion or the professionalism portion, but we never tell you specifically which questions
There
you
are
failed
sample
on.
questions on the study guide
Uh,
as well, so you can see what the questions can look like, but we don't provide the specific questions that are currently on the examination.
Someone asked about how long after passing everything do you get your certificate? So again, as I noted earlier, depending on when you complete and write the final exam and get your results back and when our board meets to ratify you, you might have to wait a few months. In terms of actually getting your PIBC certified membership certificate, it's a physical document that kind of looks like this. We fill out your name, put a little gold star on it. You have a certification number. Again, because we do that annual World Town Planning Day Gala, where it's a bit of a convocation ceremony, we do hold off on sending out those certificates, either at the gala if you're able to attend, or we send them out in November afterwards. But if for whatever reason, let's say it's January and you've completed everything and you can't wait until November, just let us know and we'll try and work with you to send you your certificate ahead of time. We do send out the certificates to a calligrapher, and we do send them out in batches. It's not economical for us to just send out individual certificates for the calligrapher to work on. We do send them out only about once every 3 to 6 months. But again, if you really need your certificate as soon as possible, just contact us and we'll try and work with you on that. Would PIBC consider having special board meetings just to ratify new members? Unfortunately, no. And the short answer for that is because our board of directors are unpaid volunteers. They're professional members who have Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 jobs, just like everyone else. They have families, they have other volunteer and work commitments. And currently our board only meets on average every 2 months or so. So it does mean, again, depending on the timing of things, you might have to wait up to 2 months before the board meets to ratify you. However, if, let's say, the PSB reviews your application for candidate membership, says everything is good to go, but unfortunately our board's not meeting for another couple months, to engender goodwill and to make your life a little bit easier, even though formally and officially you're not yet a candidate member, we would still be willing to extend member rates for you to PIBC conferences and events, because again, really it's just a rubber stamp approval at that point. Same with certified membership. The PSB said, yes, you're good to go for your certified membership. All that needs to happen is the PIBC board needs to meet. What I would definitely caution you on is do not refer to yourself as a certified member or an RPP during that interim time, because you will fall afoul of our professional conduct rules and we will send you cease and desist letters and whatnot, and you might get into trouble. So in terms of using the designation, definitely do not use it until we've formally notified you and said, yes, the board has met and you've been approved. But in terms of candidate membership and getting access to member rates at conferences and events, we're willing to extend that to you, even if the board officially hasn't formally approved you for that. Sorry, just looking at some of the questions, clarifying that you submit your application for candidate membership directly to the PSB. You do not need to contact PIBC. You just need to deal directly with the PSB on that. And again, as Nzinga said, everything in terms of the steps of the certification process, the logging the work experience, the course, the exam, the mentorship, the sponsorship, all of that you deal directly with the PSB. So if you have any questions or concerns on that, please contact the PSB directly. But in terms of just maintaining your annual membership with PIBC, and that's really just paying the annual membership fees, and once you become a certified member, fulfilling your CPL reporting requirements, you deal directly with PIBC on that. If, let's say, you move to another province halfway through the certification process, you get your candidate membership here with PIBC, maybe you've logged your experience, but you haven't done the course or the exam yet, and then you suddenly up and move to Ontario to take a job, all you need to do is contact the PIBC office and the PSB. So just send both of us an email, CCing us both on it, letting us know, hey, I've moved from BC to Ontario. Here's my new address. You can pick up from the process exactly where you left off. You do not need to start it from square one once you move to Ontario. And that goes back to my earlier comment at the start about us working with our counterparts to ensure that the certification process is the same across the country, again, to facilitate that ease of labor mobility and professional designation. Again, if you have your RPP designation in BC and you move to Ontario, you can transfer your membership to Ontario, which does flag another issue for me, which is if you get your RPP designation here in BC, again, the regulation of professions is at the provincial level. So if you're a PIBC member with an RPP designation, your use of that RPP designation stops the moment you get to the BC provincial border. If you move to Ontario and you start handing out business cards with an RPP designation on it, but you are not a member of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute, you will fall afoul of their regulations and they will take legal action against you. They might give you a soft warning, give you an opportunity to correct the behavior, but please be aware, if you will be working in multiple provinces or you move from province to province, you need to move your certified membership or take out joint membership in order to use the RPP designation in those other provinces. So if you are not a member in that province, you cannot use the RPP designation. And I just want to clarify that because we do have a lot of members here in BC who also work in Alberta. And Alberta is pretty tough on going after people who use the RPP designation in Alberta if they don't hold certified membership in Alberta. So just be mindful of that. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to contact myself or Nzinga. Sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions. Some people were asking about overseas experience. Again, if all 100% of your experience is gained outside of Canada, you're probably just going to fall afoul of that sort of legislative framework. And in terms of the time, unfortunately, I will end things off here because I don't want to hold up people too much longer. But I will take note of people's questions that we have not been able to address, particularly the ones that have come in the last 10 to 15 minutes. I'll work with Nzinga on providing some answers and sending that out to everyone next week when I have the recording available and sending out, again, a copy of the slides, the scope of practice document, as well as some other information. So at this point, I'm just going to sign off. I will flip back all the way to the end of the webinar again, so you just have that contact information. Again, feel free to contact Shayna and or Nzinga as appropriate in terms of submitting an application for candidate membership. If you have general questions about membership or working and planning or whatnot, feel free to contact me directly. Ideally, I prefer these types of things to be dealt with over the phone or in person because it's a lot easier to address than by email, because the steps and the processes that a person goes through can vary depending on their individual circumstances. And so it's a lot of if this, then that, or, you know, if this doesn't happen, then you have to go and deal with this. And addressing those sort of issues are a lot easier to do verbally over the phone or in person rather than by email. So if you want to set up a date or time to contact me or meet with me at the PIBC office, feel free to do so, and you have my email and contact information there. And same, if you feel you need to have a bit of a discussion with someone at the PSB, again, email them, try and set up a date or time to meet with them, and they will provide as much assistance as they can. Again, I just want to thank Nzinga for your time, for the 2 hours that you've put in. We will be making this recording available online, again, certainly through a Dropbox link that people can download the recording, which will probably be about 200 megabytes in size. So it may take some time to download, or we might post this on our YouTube page because we need some content on that. But again, I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time out of their busy schedules, either to watch and participate, ask questions. And again, if we're not able to answer your questions here or in our follow-up email, feel free to contact us at any time. As I noted earlier, you know, myself and Nzinga and other staff here at PIBC and PSB are paid to help people get through the process. I want to help people through the process, but it really does depend on you, the individual, letting us know as soon as possible if you have any questions or concerns, if there's any hindrances, even if you have a concern that something down the road might be a hindrance for you, but it's not a hindrance right now, and your default might be to think, well, I won't bring it up unless it actually becomes an issue. Well, my suggestion is bring it up now before it becomes an issue, because we may be able to provide you now a course of action that will help you avoid that situation later down the road. So I love helping people, but I can only help you unless you let me know earlier rather than later. Again, Nzinga, thank you for your time, and to everyone else. And at this point, we will close it off. And again, thank you, everyone. And talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.